Hey guys, it's Cece, and today I am here to talk about all of the books that I read in June. So, in case you didn't see my June TBR, and in case you are new to my channel, you may not know that my plan in June this year and in all Junes is to read exclusively queer books. And by queer books, I mean that the main character of every book that I read has to identify somewhere within the LGBTQIA+ community. I had a very sizable TBR. I participated in 3 separate readathons, and I completed a total of 11 books, which is awesome, in my personal opinion. The even cooler thing about that 11 book number is that I enjoyed basically everything I read. The lowest rated book that I'm going to talk about, I gave 3 stars, and I gave a total of 3 books 5 out of 5 stars. It was an incredible month. So let's not waste too much more time. I am going to start with the lowest rated book that I read in June, work my way up to the highest rated, most loved book that I read during the month. This is my June wrap up. Let's talk about some queer titles. So the first book that I want to talk about, my lowest rated book of June, was You Asked for Perfect by Laura Silverman. This book, along with a few others, I read for the Buzzwordathon, and the theme for this round of Buzzwordathon was to read books with the word you in the title. I have 2 other books that I read during Buzzwordathon, and we'll get to those in a bit. You Asked for Perfect is a 2019 YA release with a bisexual Jewish main character. It is about a senior in high school, Ariel. He's first chair, he wants to go to Harvard, he has his whole, life planned out, but getting one bad grade could destroy this entire future that he's decided is his only option. So when he fails a quiz, he decides to hire a tutor who happens to be the guy across the street, Amir. The 2 of them kind of fall for each other, and then Ariel has to decide if he is willing to put his academic future in jeopardy just to live day to day and to possibly have a relationship. This book I gave 3 out of 5 stars, which to me means that it was just fine. It was ultimately, in my opinion, a fairly forgettable book. I didn't like the way that this book was written. First person present tense is incredibly difficult to do, in my opinion. There was just something about it that kept me at a distance for a long time when I was trying to read. The other thing is that this book jumps around a ton. You're never really sure where it's going to go next, and Ariel is constantly jumping around for his different motivations, his different relationships. So instead of necessarily getting a story about high school academic pressure, it feels like you never quite know what the thing is going to be that's giving Ariel a hard time that week. Ultimately, I think the biggest failing of this book is that the relationship wasn't that great. It kind of came out of nowhere, and then that was it. And I really would have wanted a little bit more build-up. I will say that if you enjoy stories about academic pressure, this does a really good job. This does a good job with, a supportive family system, while also having a supportive family system that doesn't acknowledge how terrible academic pressure is until a moment when, they have a wake-up call, and seeing what they're putting their kids through is suddenly put into a different context. But that was really valuable for that. It's ultimately, a fine book. I just thought it was okay, which is why I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Next up, we have Small Town Hearts by Lillie Vale. This is also a 2019 YA release. This one was also released in March. This is about a girl who goes by Babe, and she has just graduated from high school. She works at her small Maine town's local coffee shop, and she has her 2 best friends who she's going to spend the summer with, and then a breakup and a mistaken kiss kind of shatters that friend group, and Babe starts to fall for a guy who's just in town for the summer. He's a summer boy, and the rule is you do not fall for people who only come to the small town for a summer, and yet Babe does. This features a bisexual main character and is super delightful in a lot of ways. I would say it's a lot heavier than I was anticipating. It's not too heavy, it's still very much a summer contemporary, but it really deals with a friendship breakup in a way that I thought was interesting. Though it did do one of my least favorite things that YA tends to do, which is to introduce a book and say, this is the main character's best friend, and then have them immediately fight so that you have no context for why they were friends in the first place. Babe is also trying to get over her ex-girlfriend who is back in town, and I really liked that stuff. Like, it was a perfect summer book. The romance is sweet, it deals with family issues, friend issues in a really great way. I would say if you like How to Make a Wish by Ashley Herring Blake but want something a little bit lighter, this is a good fit. I would also say it's really great if you love Dirty Dancing and you want a book like Dirty Dancing but there's a bisexual main character. This is like a perfect beachy read. So I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, we have the book that my patrons chose for me to read in June, and that is Kings, Queens, and Inbetweens by Tanya Boteju. This is about a girl named Nima. She is a lesbian and she is biracial. Her dad is white and her mother is Sri Lankan. And the love interest in this book is a girl named Winnow who is also biracial. She is white and Japanese. And this is about Nima, who is kind of stuck in a rut. She's feeling like she's been dealing with the same things constantly. She's not really moving forward. She's in love with her straight best friend. Her mom left a year before and she doesn't know why. And then during a carnival, Nima stumbles upon her town's local drag scene. She meets a load of drag queens. She falls for a drag king and she starts to use drag as a way to sort of understand herself and to create a new space for herself. This was a really hard book to rate because it took me a very long time to get into it. I read this book and Small Town Hearts and a couple other ones I'll be talking about for Summerathon, and I think at the beginning it felt like I was getting to the end of a month of reading so much contemporary that it was all starting to blend together, so I had just a hard time getting into the narration of it, but once I got to the bulk of the story, like, I could not stop reading. It was so engaging, it was so interesting. And even the end, I thought was absolutely fascinating. I do agree with a lot of reviews that say that this book left a lot of open-ended things. There were a lot of things that didn't get resolved, some to do with the main character's storyline, some to do with another character's storyline. I would say that there are 2 big things that we don't get any kind of resolution on, and I wish that we got that kind of resolution, but the thing that I really liked about this book is that it is incredibly messy. It's about a main character who messes up a lot, who constantly makes mistakes, who doubts herself, and just having the passion and love and support of the people in her life, new and old, to sort of help her recreate her identity. It's a really fascinating story. I loved how much drag culture was in here. I loved the variety of identities that we got as far as different people in the drag scene. This is a really messy coming-of-age story that I loved. I definitely wish that some questions had been answered, but like by the time I got to the last 50 pages, I didn't stop smiling. It was just brilliant. So I wound up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars. And thank you very much to my patrons for choosing this as my June book. I loved reading it, and if you want to become a patron of mine and choose a book that I read every single month, the link will be in the description below. Go check out my Patreon. Okay, next up I have The House of Impossible Beauties by Joseph Cassara, which I read for the Queer Lit Readathon. All 3 of these readathons I will have reading vlogs up for shortly. I'm working on it, so don't worry. This book is set in New York in the 1980s, and it is specifically about the Harlem ball scene. So if you've seen the documentary Paris is Burning, this is highly influenced by that and is in fact a sort of fictionalized version of the House of Extravaganza, which was the first entirely Latinx house. They also mention the House of Extravaganza in the TV show Pose, so maybe you've heard of it there. I watched Paris is Burning, then I read this, and now I'm watching Pose, so I got a lot of exposure to this time period and this setting in the month of June. Besides dealing with the Harlem ball scene, obviously it's dealing with specific characters, so this is very much engaging with the AIDS crisis, and it's not a happy book. Like, you should know going in that it's not a happy book, and I think if you watch Paris is Burning, you're gonna have an idea of at least part of the tone for this book, in that it is a celebration, it is a way of uplifting voices that were just sort of trying to carve out a space for themselves at this period in history, but it doesn't mean that everything was easy, and it doesn't mean that it steps around the horrific things that were also happening at the time. And I think as a portrait of a time period, this did an excellent job. But for me personally, individual characters didn't really stand out. Even though it felt like it was supposed to be an intense character study, it wasn't the characters that I was getting a lot out of. I will say Angel was the one who was the most fascinating to me. She was absolutely fantastic. I loved reading from her perspective and hearing that story. But if you are interested in this time period, if you are interested in learning about queer history, it is definitely a great resource for that. It's definitely a way of getting into our past, into a tragic past for the queer community, and especially queer people of color. So I wound up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars. Definitely encourage you to check it out. I've got to move faster. Next we have I Hope You Get This Message by Farah Rishi. This is a YA contemporary with a speculative element, coming out in October of this year, October 22nd. I picked up this copy at Book Expo. This book has 3 perspectives, Jessie, Kate, and Adim, and it is set in a not distant future at all. It's set around this time period, but basically what happens, what is the inciting incident of this book, is that Earth has intercepted a message from another planet. They've discovered that another intelligent species exists, and that they intend to exterminate the human race in 7 days' time. So this is about 3 characters and the last 7 days of Earth's existence. This is a perfect thing to read if you loved We Are the Ants. Like, 100%, if you liked We Are the Ants, you should check this out next. It had a lot of the same hallmarks of that book, of dealing with mental illness, with characters and their complex, like, family relationships, and then this had one gay main character, Jessie, and the character Adim is own voices for the Pakistani representation. He is Pakistani American, and his sister, who he's trying to track down, is gay as well. This is a really excellent book. I think that I was having a hard time near the end connecting as much as I wanted to. Like, I felt like I had fallen for these characters and for how disastrous this storyline is for all 3 of them. But I wanted a bit more out of the ending than I got. I will say, like a lot of the other books that I read this month, I liked this book because it was messy. I think that there is a real element of realism in how we as a society would handle the end of the world, and how we would react if the people telling us that the world was ending was our current government as it stands, because, you know, no names are named in this, but it is fairly clear that Donald Trump is president in this universe at this time. So then also, how do you take information from a government who you don't trust, especially when that government tells you that the Earth is ending in 7 days and no one's going to do anything about it? Jessie is a character who is constantly fucking up. Like, that's been his entire life. He basically just sleeps with guys and hopes they move on, and he has no interest in ever forming any kind of emotional connection, and his family has no money, and so he steals the food that they need to eat. And when it comes to the end of the world, he realizes that he can make up an invention and trick a lot of people to get their money. And, like, I really admire a book for having a character like that, because he is not someone that you really want to connect to, because all he does for so much of this book is mess up, and, like, grandly and seemingly without any remorse. And that's difficult because so many people are going to hate that without acknowledging the things that this book is like getting into about that character. There's a lot to love here. Like I said, if you like We Are the Ants, this is definitely a follow-up. You should definitely keep your eye out in late October for this book. I think a lot of people are going to love it. I personally wound up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I have a teeny tiny graphic novel, and that is the Tea Dragon Festival. This is an early copy. The finalized copy is going to be out in September of this year, and this is a prequel to the Tea Dragon Society, which is delightful. So this is a prequel. It's set a few decades before the Tea Dragon Society, and it is about a small village and the main character, Rin, while they are out collecting stuff for their village, happen upon a cabin where they find a dragon who's been asleep for 80 years. And this dragon didn't realize that he had fallen asleep for 80 years, but it happened, and so now Rin is helping to introduce Aiden back into this village society and to make him feel at home and cared about. So this has a non-binary main character, which is super cool. This is a really queer series in general. Not a lot of specific identity terminology is used. It's just very accepting and queer and diverse in so many ways. Both of these books have had people of color as main characters. The first book had a character in a wheelchair in a fantasy setting, which was just like so normalizing and wonderful. This book, there is a side character who is deaf or hard of hearing, and they use sign language, and everyone else in the village uses sign language, so there's a lot of signing like within the story. These are just really healing, soothing graphic novels, which is why I adore them. They make me happy because it normalizes how inclusive fantasy can be if you're willing to push yourself, like, even the tiniest bit. A fantasy society being completely white, straight, and able-bodied is ridiculous. When you have the amount of creativity it takes to create a fantasy world and then you do that, there's just no point. And I love the way that this series normalizes a more inclusive version of fantasy. So, I really, really enjoyed this. I thought it was a great prequel. I loved seeing Eric and Hess again, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, the last 4-star book I have to talk about is Small Beauty by Jaya King Wilson Yang. I recommended this book in my Own Voices Trans-Spec book recommendations video, so if you want to go check that out, you should go check it out, because I recommend a ton of really great books in there, and this is one of them. This is a very simple book on the surface, but it's absolutely brilliant. It is about May, a mixed-race trans person of Chinese descent who is dealing with the recent death of her cousin, who is kind of the only person in her family left that she was close to. She also has recently lost her aunt, and while she is in the process of grieving her cousin, she discovers that her aunt was also queer and just never told her about it. So this is about grief and anger and how you handle anger when the people you're angry at are the ones that you're grieving. It's also about May's life before she left to deal with her grief and her anger, where she had this community of trans women and she is really sort of mourning the fact that she's left them behind to deal with her own stuff. It's just a really, really excellent book. And like I said, this is Own Voices, and it's brilliant. I think that there is, if you've ever read Nevada by Imogen Binney, I think that this is a great one to read next. I think that they are similar to each other in sort of their messy, very introspective storylines about trans women and the lives that they are leading. This book was just so highly recommended by a number of sources about queer books, and I'm so glad that I got the chance to pick it up in June, because I thought it was heartbreaking but brilliant, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I want to talk about The 5 Stages of Andrew Brawley by Shaun David Hutchinson, this was the first book that I read in June, so this was a great way to start as well. This is about a boy named Drew who he was the only survivor of an accident that killed his entire family. Basically, the way he's dealt with it is that he now lives in an abandoned wing of the hospital where he was brought when his family was in this accident. No one knows who he is. No one knows he's a 17-year-old boy who is on the run because he has no family. And it's because he knows that he has avoided death, and there is a specific person in the hospital who he views as death. So he's trying to protect other people in the hospital from her. And then a boy is rolled into the ER who is absolutely covered in burns. Drew's really fascinated by him and he becomes kind of obsessed. This is a heartbreaking book. I feel like I've gone back and forth on Shaun David Hutchinson in that I absolutely loved We Are the Ants. I didn't really love The Apocalypse of Elena Mendoza, and so I was wondering where the next book I read by Shaun was going to fall. I'm so glad that this is the next one that I read. There's also a comic in here, a comic that Drew is writing, and so you get that every couple of chapters. I love the writing of this. I absolutely love the way that Shaun writes. It just has this quality that is so heartbreaking with every word. It oozes heartbreak. And that seems like a weird thing to absolutely love about a style of writing, but it works perfectly for this, for a book that deals with so much. I'm going to leave some trigger warnings for books that I have trigger warnings written down for in the description below. This one, definitely look into trigger warnings before you read it. I cried through the last chapter, which was like such a balm to the rest of the story, and through the entire final comic that was so beautiful. This is another book that deals with grief in such a visceral and difficult way that I adore. I just loved this book, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Okay, now it's time to talk about the 3 books that I gave 5 out of 5 stars to. The first of those is On a Sunbeam by Tillie Walden, a huge graphic novel that is my new favorite graphic novel of all time. So, there's a lot to love about the art style of this. A lot of it is very, like, monotone color-wise, but those colors change up a lot, and it's gorgeous. So I fell in love with Tillie Walden's style when I read her graphic memoir, Spinning, and I've really wanted to read her other books, and this started out as a webcomic that got published by First Second, and it is 2 storylines intertwined. They take place 5 years apart, and they're both about the same girl. Her name is Mia, and this is highly speculative. Like, this is a really weird book. So the first story is Mia when she's 14, going to an all-girls boarding school, and then she meets a girl named Grace who has a secret and a past, and they start to fall for each other. And then the other story is 5 years later when Mia has just joined a restoration crew. Basically, this is a crew that goes around on a spaceship and they repair the buildings that are floating through space, because a lot of what makes the society work is that there are planets, but more than that, there are free-floating buildings, and those buildings need to be restored, and so that is what the crew of this ship does. But that storyline is also about Grace trying to find Mia again, because you know something happened, and it's like epic in a way I never could have anticipated. If you like Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, this is your next book. This is next, because it is a weird, wild character study of a crew in space who love one another, and it centers pretty much exclusively on queer women. Almost everyone in the story is a woman. There is one character who is non-binary. There's another relationship between 2 women, the, like, captain and the first mate of the ship that Mia is on. It's just epic and romantic in a way that I wasn't anticipating, and there are so many moments of just, like, quiet intimacy that are what make graphic novels my favorite. Like, those moments where you just have one full-page spread and you feel what that moment means. It's my favorite. I could not stop comparing this to Long Way to a Small Angry Planet when I was reading it. I cried. I hugged it to my chest. It's beautiful, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Second to last, I have Tell Me How You Really Feel by Amina May Safi. This is a brand new YA contemporary. It was released at the beginning of June, and it is about 2 girls who absolutely hate each other, who are forced to work together on a project, and then they fall for each other and everything's perfect. So there is Sana, who is Iranian American, and she lives with her mother, who is a production designer, and she's a cheerleader. When she was like a freshman in high school, she tried to ask out a girl named Rachel. Rachel is Mexican and Jewish, and she thought Sana was asking her out as a joke, and they have hated each other ever since. Or, more accurately, Rachel has hated Sana ever since, and Sana has continued to hold a candle for her epic crush on Rachel, and then they are forced to work together on Rachel's end-of-year project, which could, like, determine whether or not she gets into the college of her dreams. I've been comparing this to Gilmore Girls a lot, and it's not just... that's not from out of nowhere, because this book is dedicated to the creator of Gilmore Girls. So, like, I'm not pulling that out of my ass. It's clearly very much inspired by that. Sana's entire, like, backstory is very Gilmore Girls-esque. It's very Gilmore Girls, intentionally so, but it brings another layer to that by bringing in, you know, the fact that this is about queer women of color. They both identify as lesbians. This is just also epically romantic. Like, I was not ready to read a book like this about queer girls, because I feel like, you know, I've read some of this story before, but I could never connect to it quite the same way, and it was brilliant for that. Literally, when I finished it, I hugged it to my chest. Every single time I put it down, Brian, my roommate, was like, "Is it still perfect?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." Because I love these two. Their romance, like, it's still a slow burn, even though this is a fairly short book. It's still slow burn perfectly. It has all of the perfect highs and lows. I loved every second of it. And I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And finally, let's talk about the book that I read that I loved absolutely the most this month, coming as a shock to literally no one. It's Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. Y'all were right, it was perfect. I don't really use tabs anymore, like, it just became a frustration for me, my tabbing systems, and I was constantly running out of some colors and having too many of others, so I don't really tab anymore. You seeing this? You seeing this? It is tabbed to hell. So this is about Alex, who is the first son of America. His mother became the president after Barack Obama, and his nemesis, the person that he hates most, is a prince, Prince Henry of Wales. That's his official title. And when they cause an international incident at Prince Philip's wedding, the two of them have to pretend to be best friends so that relations between the two countries aren't permanently destroyed because the two of them are idiots. And then they become friends, and then they fall in love, and I keep talking about this book to people, and I don't know how to convey the epicness of my love and appreciation for this story, the epicness of this romance, how well Casey McQuiston mixes so much humor. This is the funniest book I've ever read in my entire life, with, like, epic, heartfelt, sappy declarations of love over email at 3 a.m. Like, their emails literally made me cry. It's huge and epic and full of love and full of a future that I wish that we had, like an epic, loving, accepting future. Alex is also biracial. His father is Mexican. That's a very important thing. Alex is bisexual. Henry is gay. There are a lot of other queer side characters. Alex's, like, friend slash ex slash most important person to him besides his sister, Nora, she's bisexual. A lot of the people who work in the White House are queer. One of the heads of Secret Service, she is a trans woman and she has a wife. It's so loving and accepting and hopeful, and a dream picture perfect version of a world I wish that we lived in. I love these idiot boys and their tumbling over their feelings and how much they hate each other and how much they love each other, and I was so overwhelmed for every single moment of this. I definitely cried at the end. People kept being like, get ready, you're gonna cry, and I was like, I'm probably not gonna cry. I cried. Like, everyone's been saying how perfect this book is, and I was really starting to feel like this is just another one of those books that's about two guys falling in love that everyone is going to fawn over more than any other queer story, because that's what we accept as the pinnacle of queer rep. Two boys kissing. But this was so much more than that to me. Like, those books are great. I love plenty of books about queer guys. I love books with male-male relationships, but it is impossible to ignore the fact that books about guys kissing get way more attention than any other kind of queer media. I really thought that might be what was happening with this book, but it wasn't. And I'm so fucking excited that Casey's next book is about girls kissing, because the epic romantic fabulousness of this book was perfect in every way, and I can't wait to have a book that is in any way like this for girls as well. I know that I'm going to love it even more somehow. Obviously, I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars, and I will never stop raving about it, because it's fantastic. And in general, these 3 books exemplified, like, my favorite stuff that I read this month. They are each pieces of media that are now new faves, and I love them. And I'm so glad that I got to read them in June. But okay, that is it. That is everything that I read in June. I'm sure this was a very long wrap-up, so thank you for sticking with me, hearing how much I loved all of these books. If you have read any of these books, please let me know down in the comments below what you thought of them. I would love to hear other reviews. And please let me know if I've convinced you to read any of these books. I would love to hear that as well. I hope that you all had a really lovely Pride. This was a difficult month for me, just emotionally, and I think that I got through through it with like flying colors, all things considered. So I'm so grateful to all of you. I'm so grateful to these stories and to the queer community that exists online. I love you all. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!